So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about the science of sleep, just because in lockdown there's some issues with melatonin. I don't know if either of you know that. I'm also going to talk about the main issues in sleep, the difficulties that you're going to have. So I'm going to just do a bit of stats. Actually, 1 in 4 of us really struggle to sleep. It's pretty high and it's growing. And 20 to 30% of young children actually have some sort of sleep disorder. And this rises, I don't know if any of your children have got special needs or chronic illness, it rises to 80%. And what I've been noticing with a lot of families is that they've been telling me that there's sleep problems in lockdown, and that's not surprising. So we'll go to the next one. And I just thought it'd be good to think about, why do we sleep? Actually, nobody knows. So we've got an idea about why we might sleep. So these are the main things. So one is for recovery. It's rest for your body, cell growth, housekeeping. One is sort of evolution from protectors. So if you think about babies, babies aren't born, I'll talk a little bit, they're not born with a 24-hour cycle. It's something that, we basically grow into. So it was for keeping quiet, sleeping. And one was for energy regulation. So we use less energy when we are asleep. And what's really important for children and for us, but especially for children, is that there's brain and memory reorganization. So synapses, both of you obviously know about synapses and neurons and stuff. So for children, if they're not getting enough sleep or we're not, then, our memory's affected. That's why there's a lot of cognitive issues with sleep difficulties. And memory consolidation, so formation of long-term memories and learning. And for children, it's really important because this is the only place where growth hormone is released. So I've spent pretty much a lot of my lifetime working with children with ADHD. And so a lot of children with ADHD, even though they're on kind of Ritalin and Concerta, we always measure their height, because actually, if you don't sleep, you don't grow. So it's got a lot of importance. So I just thought I'd do a little bit about how do you know if you're sleep deprived. A lot of us sort of carry on, and especially if we've got children, we're working and trying to balance both things. Most of the time we're sleepy at the wrong time of the day. So you might see that your children actually feeling really, really exhausted. You have trouble paying attention, and we know that the cognitive effects of sleep deprivation are pretty big. So if you're just lying down, like lying on the sofa, you tend to fall asleep really quickly. Or you might notice your children as well. I mean, basically nodding off. Or paradoxically, you might be quite wired, and your children might be quite wired. So a lot of children get overtired and start to kind of, start running around. For children as well, your child might be easily frustrated and very quickly irritated. And the other thing is keeping their impulses in check. Most children are, born dysregulated. We learn how to regulate. So at 6, we're just starting to learn self-control. And before then, our impulses are going to be inhibited anyway. But the more sleep deprived you are, the worse it is. So I'm just going to talk about the sort of what's the impact. So there's physical impact, lack of energy and fatigue, which is, common sense. But a lot of us who have problems sleeping have a very compromised immune system. So you might see that your child gets more colds, coughs. And obviously in this period, with the virus, with COVID-19, it's really important to sleep. It's just as important, as exercise and losing weight. But a lot of people don't sleep. There's weight gain because your cortisol builds up, slow impaired reactions, and again, I've just put kind of lack of growth as well. With children especially, I put it in a bit, there's a really good sort of research there, is that what we know is that most sleep problems start between the ages of 1 and 3. And actually, there's a trajectory that they carry on, even when there's quite an impact, even when actually the sleep problem has finished. And in terms, the biggest one is cognitive problems. And obviously, you might see that when your children are sleep deprived, they've got more tantrums. They may be more anxious and more clingy. They may be more aggressive, and actually, they may sometimes, not be as social. And so, as I was saying earlier, there's attentional issues, so they can't pay attention. There's emotional and behavioural problems. So that's why I'm really keen for people to sleep. And I know a lot of parents feel, oh my goodness, this is too much to do. But actually, if I'm working with people, it's the most important one to start with. Because if your children aren't sleeping, the rest of everything will be difficult. So, how do we sleep? So there's two systems, and this is especially in lockdown. There's a 24-hour cycle called circadian rhythm, and the other one is the homeostatic sleep drive, and they work together. So as I said earlier, we're not born with our 24-hour cycle, and that's why babies wake up a lot. And it's controlled by melatonin, which is from our pineal gland, and that's in our hypothalamus. And babies have a lot less melatonin, which is why they wake up more, because they're still kind of growing and developing. So melatonin is what I've said is the hormone that regulates sleep. Melatonin production depends on light, not on artificial light. So it depends on the light going through our retina. And basically, we need to expose our light during the day, so it increases melatonin at night. So what's been happening in lockdown, and if we expose our eyes to the light in the evening, it decreases it. So I can hear.
Block out the noise. So.
I'll talk a little bit more about melatonin just a bit, and it links in with the homeostatic sleep drive. And that's basically easy to understand. It says, the longer you stay awake, the sleepier you are. And it's about your likelihood of falling asleep at a given time. So it's caused by a neurotransmitter called adenosine. And basically, the thing is with that is that if you drink lots of caffeine, it affects that level. So that's why all people like me say, and also for children, they won't be your children, but a lot of teenagers drink those caffeine drinks, like Red Bull and all those kind of stuff. Well, basically, it affects your adenosine and actually prevents you from sleeping more. So we always say, if you're going to have caffeine or you're going to have coffee or tea, have it in the morning. So if everybody's having sleep problems, have all those things in the morning and don't have caffeine in the afternoon or late evening. I know some people say, oh, it doesn't affect me, but it probably does. And just before that's, the kind of two drives. One of the other things is that sleep has an emotional side too, which is what I'm pretty keen on thinking about as well. It's the first separation. So if we think about it, and it's a bit of a funny old thing, sleep, isn't it? Because your children are away from you in a funny state where you have weird dreams for a long time. And, so if you think about babies, going to sleep is a place where you separate, and it's the first separation. Sometimes sleep can become a part of a relationship problem between yourself and your child because it's about, letting go. And so that's why there can be a lot of anxiety around your children sleeping. And often, because I do a lot of developmental histories, losses, bereavements, or difficult births or trauma can really be part of a sleep difficulty. So a lot of parents that I've seen who may have had a difficult birth and then they get into a difficult sleep pattern, they don't want to leave their child because there's been difficulties. It can be really hard to let go. So all these things I think are take into account and consider why there might be a sleep problem. The reason why a lot of, and I'll talk about this later, why a lot of sleep training doesn't work is actually you don't address the emotional side. And so I always address the emotional side first. And actually the evidence for a lot of the sleep training, like Ferber approach, is a bit mixed, to be honest. So Okay, so how much sleep do we need? This is cultural, actually. So between 1 and 3, 12 and 14 hours. Between 3 and 5, 11 and 12. And we need 7 to 9 hours of, sort of 7.5 is good for us. But we need 1 to 2 hours of deep sleep. So what a lot of the sleep scientists are thinking about now is that we need to go into deep sleep. So that's when our body really rests down. So deep sleep occurs in non-REM. So you're not in deep sleep if you feel like you're dreaming a lot. Do you know what I mean? Like you're in that kind of a light sort of state. So that, and you often actually, when you are like that, you can often in the morning feel really groggy. So what's important is to know you're having a good night's sleep, is that you know that you're going into a deep sleep. And that's the same for children, but children's stages are a little bit different to ours. And these are cultural, so there isn't any set things. Different cultures have different sleep needs. Okay, in us, there's 4 phases of sleep, REM and non-REM, and children up to age of 3, which they have 2 phases, so it's less. And because there's no babies here, but the circadian rhythm is not, what I was saying earlier, is not established between 0 and 6 months. So the melatonin is low, and that's why people like me say don't cry it out between 0 and 6 months, because actually your child hasn't developed the 24-hour cycle. And so they're going to wake up. And even all of us wake up. So it's a bit of a myth, night waking means that children don't wake up, because actually there's a lot of reasons. We all wake up at least 3 to 4 times a night. You might not realize that. Okay, so in lockdown, what's kind of happening is that most of us are sleeping in. Maybe your children aren't sleeping in, and we're getting up and going to bed later. Most of the time we take our children, we might even walk them to school, so you're getting some light in the morning. But actually what a lot of us, what I'm hearing is that we're getting a lot of light in the afternoon, because most of us might be doing some schoolwork in the morning. So what's happening is you're not getting your melatonin at the right time. So what's really important is to have the melatonin. You can go out in the afternoons, but too much melatonin in the afternoon actually means that it's less likely you're going to be able to go to sleep. So what's really good to do is actually ensure that your children are out in the morning, if you've got gardens, to just get them out in that first bit of light. The other thing is that we're all on screens, aren't we? I mean, we're all doing Zoom, if we're working from home. So we're getting a lot of blue light. And what we do know is that blue light from screens affects melatonin uptake. And so, and actually a lot of the night lights and LED lights are all full of blue light. So if you want your children to sleep, it's really important to, I mean, I've sort of said this, is to get out in the sun in the morning, and also allow the sun to come through in their blinds. I mean, most of us have probably got blackout blinds, but if you've got curtains, let it come through in the morning, because it will help them to get up in the morning. I don't know if your children are like, because what I've been hearing, loads of kids are not getting up in the morning, but actually it's quite important to try and keep your sleep schedule the same. Get them out in the garden for a little bit. You could have breakfast in the garden, come back in, allow the sun to come through the blinds. I mean, and also when we started lockdown, the spring the spring was changing. So in a way, in that week, we were going to feel a little bit jet lagged anyway because of that. Our circadian rhythm was changing. So we had those 2 things coming together, and that's hard. So we started it in a bit of a weird kind of state. And so it's my bugbear. So it's really important for all of us, not just our children, but to have no screen time. I know a lot of parents, just because they want their kids to go to bed at night, are giving them the iPad or to listen to stuff. But if you can turn it over so it's not emitting the light, put the kind of, I don't know if you have a filter on it, on the iPad or whatever. And the other thing is that because we're mostly getting up later, it's try and keep the activities quiet for at least 1 to 2 hours before bed. Bring things down. So, I always say, don't play fizzy games. Some children actually wind themselves up before they go to bed. because they're trying to wind down. So what I used to say is, if you've got a very active child, try and do something with breathing and activity. So you know those elastic band, gym band things? The kids with ADHD, we used to kind of do some breathing, blowing, but they're moving, but they're not actually running around. Um, they may be getting anxious. Their amygdala might be kind of zooming up because it's separation time. But I'll talk a little bit about that. And so I just, again, if you've got filters, and put them on your phones and tablets and computer, so it stops the blue light. And the other thing is, there's a lot of normal light anyway now. But if you've got lights in their room, the night lights, most of them emit blue light anyway, so it's going to keep them up more. Those little night light things. So have lights on the amber spectrum. So you can get, try not to use LED lights because they're really strong with blue light. So get some bulbs that are warm red or amber, and not LED. We have to talk about the worries as well. So I'll go into a little bit more about that. A lot of children get anxious at night. Have a name for it. So who is that comes out? So the worry wobbler, which is one of my clients called, which I thought, but ask them, who is that comes out at night? What are they called? Who is it? Externalize it. The two main issues are, which I'm sure you've come with, are difficulty in falling asleep within a reasonable time. So when we mean a reasonable time, really a child should 30 to 60 minutes. So a child should be able to get to sleep, within 30 minutes. And the other one is bedtime resistance, which is refusing to go to bed. So those are the two main, and I put night awakenings, but I'm not going to focus on that today. I mean, we can talk about that because it's a sort of a similar thing, but a lot of children do wake up. But if they can learn to self-soothe, then they'll be able to get themselves off back to sleep again. So in a way, if we deal with the other stuff, then they'll be able to go back off to sleep. The main reasons for nighttime fears is nighttime fears and separation anxiety. So normal anxiety, I'm just going to skip 18 to 24 months, is we have separation. All children have separation anxiety from caregivers because it's about attachment. And between 2 and 5 years, children are normally feared of the dark, afraid of losing parents, and sea monsters. Between 5 and 7, they often feel like there's ghosts or witches. They fear disasters, and we're in one, aren't we? There's a pandemic. So you can imagine that a lot of children are, between these ages are naturally worried. And then we're in a pandemic, and they worry about losing mum and dad and monsters. And then normal fears for children older is normally about school. It's more kind of social things, social performance, anxiety and injury, and the same sort of with teenagers. I was saying earlier, a lot of the reason why sleep training is not effective is because we're not addressing the fears. And so developmentally, children need to have a sense of time. So that's what I was saying earlier. A lot of children who are young don't have a sense of time. So sleep feels like it's ages. It's like miles and miles away. So, 12 hours away from mummy and daddy is long. And obviously, if you're co-sleeping, that's fine. So that's a problem for them. And so within your ages, they think, whoa, that's ages away. They also can't control their emotions, it doesn't start till sort of 5 or 6. They also can't distinguish, appearances from reality. So if they see something in their room, like just a shadow or something, they might see it's a monster, but it's just a pile of clothes. Or often they'll say there's something under my bed, and it might, be a ball or something, but they think it's something. This is sort of Gwen Dewar. She's got a great website. It's called Parenting Science. So if you want to go and have a look at it, it's great. It's got some great things. She's an anthropologist, so it's very interesting. So if you're trying to deal with your child's worries because of nighttime fears and separation anxiety, talk to them about the worry, normalize it, because all of us are in fight or flight, and that lockdown, we're all feeling uncertain and scared and frightened. And if we're feeling uncertain and there's no end, they're going to pick that up too, and they've got their own worries. So it's like I said earlier, call it the worry monster or the wobbler, and tell it's normal to be, a lot of children feel scared when they're away from mummy and daddy for a long time, because sleep is a bit funny, isn't it? Try and be calm, teach them relaxation. Some children that I've worked with find with that thing, if they can't get off to sleep, is to help them to count. So you've got to teach them to self-soothe, because if they're struggling to go off to sleep, then you need to help them to do that. So sleep is, when they're babies, we put them down and then they can go off. And some children struggle with that, and they still struggle with it as they get older. They need you to be there to stroke them, to be, so they need to develop other ways of helping them to self-regulate and self-soothe. So some children like meditation and relaxation or visualizations, but other children, it doesn't work. So teach them images that help them to feel safe in their minds. So positive images to help them to feel safe, happy, and confident. Other things for younger, if you've got boys, if they're into superheroes or they're into game of talking to them about that, doing some role play, doing the story. So younger children really benefit from telling a story about a little bunny or the superhero that can't sleep, that they're safe, or doing puppets with it together, saying, what can he do? What can he do to help him to feel safe? Is there anything he can do? Giving them a dose of oxytocin. So cuddling them calms them, obviously. But the other thing with oxytocin is that if you give them a massage, it's got one of the highest things around helping. And oxytocin is the calm down chemical to cortisol. And the sensors are situated in our amygdala, which is our threat response. So if you give them a massage as part of their bedtime routine, it will help them to calm down. And it's a really good thing to do anyway, if you feel that your children are a little bit wired, just to start to do that. Don't always give them lavender oil, because lavender oil can actually make you a bit agitated if you use it too much. So one of the other problems with what happens to sleep is an inconsistent bedtime routine. So it's really important to have a proper bedtime routine. And in lockdown, I know it's all gone a bit haywire. So bring it back. So it should really be 35 to 40 minutes top. And if your child is delaying, it's probably because they're anxious or other reasons. Or sometimes they just get into the habit. I'll talk about that. So it's just keep them upstairs, because a lot of children come up and down, up and down, up and down. So bath, bed, story, cuddle, simple. And really it should be, try and keep it, if you can bring their bedtime routines back in lockdown, so start 15 minutes earlier or something, bring it back in. And if it's longer than that, there's something wrong there. So try. Sometimes we don't have to do sleep training, because actually if we work on these things, you won't need to do it. And the other thing is that genetically we're larks or owls. So it's in our genes. So if you have a child, I'm a lark, so if you have a child that is an owl, then maybe actually, or vice versa. So it's great for larks when the clocks change, because actually your child will probably get up less early, but obviously when we come into the autumn again, they'll probably get up at 5 or 6. So think about, if your child's a lark or an owl, they may be going to bed too early and then lying there for ages, not knowing, they can't actually get off to sleep. It's not about anxiety. It's actually because they're an owl. So it's what I was saying, if we've got the wrong bedtime. So what they're basically saying is that naps may be too near. Really, in the next couple of weeks, just look at your child and you can see when they're tired, because they're getting wired, they're rubbing their eyes, they might be a bit more frustrated and irritable. But if they're not, then maybe actually the problem is it's the wrong bedtime. And so if if you're needing to bring it back, what we call bedtime fading. So you might want to start 30 minutes later. So you, say if they go to bed, for example, at 7:30 and you think, God, they're not tired, then you may want to start 30 minutes later and then gradually bring it back. And then if they fall asleep by sort of 15 minutes, then you know that it's a success. Sort of try 3 nights. I've just put in, there's some articles here, and there's a sort of, that's what I mean about lark and owls. So if a lot of parents, there's a dissonance because parents think actually they should be going to bed a lot earlier and it's too early. But then there's the balance between having time. In lockdown, it's really important to have time. So together, because actually we're all together all the time. So it's tricky. And this is a hard one because a lot of problems are about learned associations and habit. So a lot of children, we call it, they get into the habit of saying no. And actually sometimes they may even resent you telling them to go to bed. And so they're expecting a battle, not because they're sat there thinking, I'm going to create a battle here today. It's just because we're very habit orientated. So, sometimes what we learn is what we get into. And then that creates conflict between you and your partners. And then there's a big, long, drawn out bedtime. And it can get into a pattern where it's actually really hard to shift. This is the worst one. So it just learns associations. And it's the same, if you've got an association with a dummy for self-soothing, it's just about trying to change the association. So giving them something else, like a lovey, or what's really good is like a t-shirt of yours with your pheromones on it to cuddle is really nice because it smells of you. So we're thinking a lot of stuff with sleep is about association. So changing the habit. It's really important that you work out being clear and consistent. So in a lot of sleep evidence, basically, if we're trying to do sleep training or changing a habit, normally it's called the 3-7, rule, because on the third day, most parents give up. So that's when a child knows, oh, they mean business now. So it's really important to get beyond the third day because most children start to kick off at that time. And if they're getting what we call a secondary gain, they're getting negative attention for the sleep difficulty. So what we want to give them is attention during the day. So you up the special time. And actually in lockdown, children might need a lot of special time because play regulates. And what I mean by special time, I mean, it's not when you're distracted or use phones. It's a designated time. So 10 to 20 minutes a day, the same time when you're giving your presence to them. It's not like going out for a bike ride or things like that. It's about playing with them. It's about not looking at your screens, not answering phones, and having it designated so a child knows I'm going to get mummy's attention at that time. So lots of children don't sleep because actually they're stressed throughout the day. And so what happens is that cortisol is naturally up in the morning. So we have high cortisol levels, everybody, in the morning. And the reason for that is to get us up. And so if a child is anxious throughout the day, the cortisol normally then dissipates and melatonin comes in. But if they're anxious, cortisol remains high. And there's an amygdala thing. So we're more scared at night anyway because of evolution. So if there's high cortisol, there's going to be much more of a threat response. So you're going to see much more anxiety, more of that fight flight stuff, more fight. So think about what might be going on with them. And this isn't just sort of when they all go back to school, they're going to have a transition or nursery. So they might be feeling anxious again because they're going to be going back to something that they've not been in. So talk to them about that. Give it words. We call it mentalization, how to mentalize. Most of us are really perceptive, but actually we don't give it back to our children. And that's a big part of containment in parenting, is giving back to your child what they might be feeling. And so you do the talks not at nighttime, you do it during the daytime, or if you're going to work out a plan with them, you do it in the daytime, not in the reaction time at nighttime, because our amygdala is heightened and so is theirs. So If you think about all those things, I haven't covered allergies. I don't know if your children have allergies, because children with allergies and asthma, there's no, if your child has got sleep apnea and all those sorts of things, that's going to impact on their sleep. So if you manage all those things, the anxiety, the fact that they don't feel safe, their fears, make sure they can self-soothe, then people often go on to sleep training. And so there's two different types. There's sort of what I've talked about is the positive routine, have a consistent routine. So all the evidence shows it's consistency. Same thing, same thing, same thing, same thing. And address the fears with faded bedtime. Or there's sort of extinction of what we call the Ferber approach. It's like removing yourself, parental presence. So if a child is anxious, you're going and they can't self-soothe, you need to address the anxiety and then do removing yourself. And there's mixed research on the Ferber approach. So if on young babies, it's kind of cry out solution, but I don't do that because I don't think it's helpful. It's there's some recent research recently that babies weren't affected by it, so it's hard to know. So there's mixed research on those sorts of things. So we're going to come to next 5 minutes and I can answer questions. So it's not being selfish to want to sleep, it's imperative. Get your sleep. So what's really important, like I said, make sure that if you're going to do sleep training, it's developmentally appropriate. So understand your child's developmental needs at their age. Keep the bedroom for sleep in lockdown, not like loads of other things, because, screens and television and all that kind of stuff. Keep it quiet, keep it quiet. Think about what your child's specific sleep problem is. Also, consider your child's temperament. So if I just do two temperaments, there's those categories, but the main two are reactive and non-reactive. So if you've got a child of reactive temperament, sleep, separation, transitions, anxieties, meltdowns are going to be in that. They're children that as a babies were much hard to soothe. You couldn't get them into a routine. Feeding might have been difficult, weaning might have been difficult, toileting might have been difficult. So a non-reactive temperament is a much more easygoing child who's in their routines, who can stick to a routine. And the most important thing is, if you're going to decide to change your sleep, make sure that your partners know what you're doing. And you sit down together. So what I always do is a lot of planning. You sit down together and think about how you're going to do it, and you stick to it at least for 7 days and review it. And remember, so what I always say to parents, if you're going to change your child's routine in lockdown, it's really important to think about the uncertainty that we're in, all the anxiety, all the changes of routine. Make sure you give them lots of special time. If they're having naps late in the afternoon, change that. Make sure that they know how to feel safe and to self-soothe. And then you can think about the sort of sleep training. If you feel like you're struggling, contact somebody like me.